Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron. I hope all is well with you out in your neck of the woods. It is almost the middle of summer. It's so hard to believe. It's gone so quickly. I am very excited about today's show. I decided to do something a little bit different. I was wondering if there was a major actor or director whose birthday might be the day that this podcast is coming out. And as it turns out, Friday, July 17th, is the birthday of Donald Sutherland. He is turning 85. And when I saw that was his age, I was really surprised. He has been in so many major movies even recently, like The Hunger Games. He's just continuing to be active, and it's super impressive. So today, I'm devoting the show to works by Donald Sutherland. Now, I don't know if you believe in serendipity. Sometimes I do. Definitely today, because I was talking to a friend of mine, and I mentioned that I was going to be looking at some Donald Sutherland movies in the podcast, and she said that she had actually met him. Of all the people in all the world, the person that I spoke to was the one who had met him. She said she was in a document store in Los Angeles, and the store had a player piano there. So she was just sitting listening to the player piano, and then suddenly a voice entered her ear that said, "Are you going to learn how to do that by watching?" And she looked, and there was Donald Sutherland. She was so surprised. She said it was a moment she would never forget, and I'm happy to be able to pass that on to you. In thinking about Donald Sutherland's movies, I wanted to see his most recent work, so I'm going to talk about some of the recent movies that I could actually stream. First up is his very most recent film, which came out in 2019. It's called American Hangman. In the second segment of the show, I'm going to look at the next most recent movie that I could find streaming that he was in. It was back in 2016, and it's a film called Milton's Secret. In the third segment, I'm going to look at the next most recent film back in 2011, and that film is called The Man on the Train. Then stick around to the end of the show, and I'm going to talk about Donald Sutherland's vast career and the movies of his that were most memorable to me. So let's dive in. Donald Sutherland has been acting for a long time. According to the Internet Movie Database, the first recorded acting job that he received was on a TV series called Studio 4 back in 1962, and he played a switchboard operator. And he has been going strong ever since. It seems like the majority of his work was in the 60s to the 90s, but it's hard to even say that he's had much of a break at all. Now, when I think about Donald Sutherland, I have to admit that I don't think like, oh, I can't wait to see the next Donald Sutherland movie. Not like the next Brad Pitt movie or the next Julia Roberts movie. Even though he's had lots of lead roles, he's not necessarily what you'd call the typical leading man. He's a real character actor. And this is something that I learned about him by watching these three movies that I'm talking about today. He certainly has a great reputation. He's been nominated for 28 awards, and he's won 21. He's won 2 Golden Globes, and in 2018, he was given an honorary award at the Academy Awards. As I mentioned, the first film I'm going to look at that stars Donald Sutherland is called American Hangman. Although Donald Sutherland has been in some more recent movies, This was the one that was most recent that I could find that was available for streaming. I found it on the platform Hoopla Digital. This movie is not rated. I would give it an R. There is definitely some shocking violence in this film. The movie was written and directed by Wilson Conybeare. He's mostly directed. He's directed 2 TV series, one called Time Blazers, and the other one is called Monster Warriors. He's also a writer on those series. Donald Sutherland plays one of the major characters. He is Judge Straight. Also in the film is the actor Vincent Kartheiser, and he is known for his role as an ad executive in Mad Men. In this film, he plays Henry David Cole. He kidnapped Donald Sutherland and another man, Ron, who's played by Paul Braunstein. And another actor worth mentioning is Oliver Dennis, who plays Lieutenant Roy and did a fabulous job. This movie kind of felt like it was a cross between a TV movie and an independent film. And sometimes it was just very theatrical. It was riveting, and at the same time, I wasn't always sure that it knew what it was trying to be. To share Hoopla Digital's summary, it says, "A kidnapping, broadcast live on social media, turns into the trial of a judge who presided over a botched criminal case. This time, however, the audience gets to play judge and jury, deciding if the judge himself gets to live or die." The premise is that there's this guy who seems maybe a little mentally deranged, who takes 2 people captive. One is the judge, and another is just a guy. From the very start, we see him dragging these 2 body bags into this kind of basement, and from then on in, we are on a ride trying to figure out what is going on. Who are these people he's dragged in? Why has he done it? Is there any connection between them? He keeps playing guessing games with them, and if things aren't going quite right, it's Ron who ends up getting tortured, and the judge has to watch it without being able to do anything. Eventually, this kidnapper brings out literally a witness seat that you would see in a courtroom, and he puts Judge Straight behind it. For a good long time, we are just in the basement with these 3 characters, and the kidnapper has made it clear that he has put cameras all around, and eventually we find out that the cameras are actually showing what's going on in the basement. He's made sure that he cannot be tracked, that the location where this is happening cannot be tracked, and he's streaming it over social media. And now we start to see what's going on in the external world. At first we see a woman getting a phone call. It turns out she is a technical expert, and she's trying to trace where this is coming from and if it can be stopped. No such luck. And then the story expands to the police station, then to a newsroom, and then to the public. And the public starts responding to what is going on. This story totally kept me on my toes. I kept trying to figure out what was next, what was the next thing that was going to happen, and why. So in that way, I was totally engrossed, and the movie succeeded. I was totally entertained, not only by the story itself, but I was fascinated by how this was rolling out, and how the movie did keep my attention. It seemed like it was always one step ahead, and that was pretty neat. My favorite part was everything that was taking place in the basement. The acting was just great. The characters would reveal these little things about themselves, and with each new piece of information, I kept wanting to know what the next piece of information was going to be, and if I was going to be able to figure out what was going on my own. I really wanted to figure it out before it was revealed in the movie. I didn't completely succeed. And the part in the basement was definitely the most theatrical. It could easily have played out on a stage. The character Ron, he did great character work. He was utterly freaked out. And sometimes he was angry, and sometimes he was just terrified, and I could completely empathize with what he was going through. Sometimes I just wanted him to be quiet because I knew if he kept opening his mouth, he was just going to be asking for something. And that was hard to watch, but it was all part of the ride. Now, Donald Sutherland's character was the polar opposite. He played this grounded, strong, smart, patient character. He was giving the hostage taker a run for his money, because Donald Sutherland's character, Judge Straight, he was so busy observing what was going on and catching these little details that he had the potential to outsmart the captor in what he was doing. He seemed to be trying to impress the captor. Like maybe if he could earn his respect enough, maybe he'd let him go free, or maybe he could make friends with him and something would shift. I think it may have actually worked a little bit against him. Now the captor, he was a really interesting character. For probably at least the first third of the movie, we never even get to see his face. The camera work is done so that he remains hidden and you don't even know what he looks like. That in itself makes you stay on your toes wondering who this person is. Something that I was really impressed with, though, was Donald Sutherland's performance. And here he was probably, when this was filmed, maybe he was 83. And granted, most of the time, he was sitting or standing in place. So he didn't have to move around a whole lot. But he had a huge part. And at one point, he stands and he gives this really long, amazing monologue. And he has to show this whole range of emotion. Most of the time, he doesn't show fear. He's really calculated and trying to figure out what is going on and keeping his cool until he knows exactly what action he needs to take. But when he gives this monologue, which is at a crucial point, he starts showing his fear and his vulnerability, and it's just amazing. It contrasts really well with what he had done before. And you have this sense that inside, he is wrestling with what is really going on, and that he actually has a sense of what is ultimately going to happen before anybody else knows. How he portrays that is just incredible. There's also a point where Judge Straight is trying to help Ron, and Ron just can't have it. He's so caught up in all of his feelings that he cannot rationalize what the situation is and what actions he should take to protect himself. So the acting in the basement, which as I said is very theatrical, stands in great contrast to all of the acting that's happening in other parts of the movie. There's a scene where a news anchor hears about this story and she will do anything to get the scoop. I'd say she pulled it off, but I just didn't quite get that this was something that she inside really, really wanted. I felt she didn't completely show up 100%. Same is true for several of the police officers that showed up at the station. However, there was one officer, Lieutenant Roy, who I thought did an amazing job. His character was clear. You knew where he stood. You could see his thinking process. And I believed he had been a detective there for a long time. I felt like his character was the one that was responsible for keeping the external world grounded. So this movie had a lot of the elements of a typical thriller. Someone has been taken against their will, and you want to find out, are they going to get rescued in time? What is actually going to happen? So the formula of that, they pulled it off. I think it worked for me. At least in that I did stay interested in wanting to know what was going to happen next. Something that I think is a bit unique about this particular story has to do with the point that the movie is trying to make. Donald Sutherland's character, Judge Straight, had presided over a case, and it turned out that the person who had been found guilty was actually innocent. This is not a spoiler, it's a given fact in the movie. It's not something that you're going to try to figure out as time goes on. The kidnapper is using Judge Straight as an example. He is challenging whether the law is really worth being upheld. And he is allowing the public to vote on whether Judge Straight did the right thing or didn't do the right thing. It begs the question, can the law be perfect, black and white, or is there a gray area? And if there's a gray area, what does that mean for all kinds of people who could be wrongly accused of a crime? These are actually really important questions, and how they're asked in this movie is very dramatic. They're asked under circumstances where the stakes are extremely high, and I think it's trying to make the point that anybody who might be wrongly accused and found guilty of a crime, well, the stakes are high for them. Their life is suddenly not their own. It has been taken by the judicial system, hopefully to keep everybody else safe, but it isn't necessarily keeping the people who are wrongly accused safe. I think it's interesting that Donald Sutherland chose to be part of this film. He is clearly the biggest name attached to the movie. I had never heard of this movie before. It came out last January, and I'm going to guess it went directly to streaming. So there isn't necessarily a lot of notoriety attached to the movie. My guess is that Donald Sutherland really liked the message here. And considering the times that we're in, and when there's a lot of light being shown on racism and inequality, the law is really being judged right now. So in that way, this movie is pretty timely. I think the ending of this movie was really well done. I think it drove home the points that the rest of the film was working towards making. So it was nice that there was a conclusion that had a deeper meaning than just this open question as to whether there was going to be some kind of rescue mission or something along those lines. A bunch of things worked for me in this film. Clearly, the scene in the basement where there's just this incredible acting, that worked great. I love the suspense in this movie and how it kept me going. At the same time, I almost would have wanted the whole movie just to be the scenes in the basement. They left the scenes in the external world a lot to be desired. They just didn't carry the weight that was there in the basement. They seemed kind of trivial and like they didn't belong. While I appreciated there was some break in the intensity, at the same time, I think it would have been fine if the intensity had continued. So the film isn't perfect, but I do recommend it. I think even just to see the scenes with Donald Sutherland are worth it. He did a great job of carrying this film. In fact, it reminded me of another thriller that I had seen him in the past called Eye of the Needle. That was an action-packed thriller. And while he was considerably slowed down in this movie, he was still sharp as a tack. And he does a great job of helping you be there right in the moment with him. He as the actor knows what's coming up, but he does not let on. And that works really great for the audience. It's such a gift. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good is this movie? I'd say probably a 5, maybe a 6. But as I said, if you want to see a role where Donald Sutherland shines, this is a good one. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie Milton's Secret after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thanks for joining in the second segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie American Hangman, and now I'm going to discuss the movie Milton's Secret. As I mentioned, this is the second most recent film I could find of Donald Sutherland's that could be streamed, and I also found this one on Hoopla Digital. This movie was in the children's section of Hoopla, and it's considered a family film, though it actually felt very grown up to me. As much as this movie is about a young boy growing up, it also showed very much that the adults are growing up as well. This is a Canadian movie. And in case you didn't know, Donald Sutherland was born in Canada and is considered a Canadian actor. The movie is an hour and a half. It's rated PG, and it was released in 2016, as I think I mentioned. And it turns out it is based on a book co-authored by Eckhart Tolle and Robert Friedman. For those of you who don't know, Eckhart Tolle is a spiritual teacher, and he is the author of the best-selling book, The Power of Now. The movie was written and directed by Barnett Bain, and he co-wrote the screenplay with Donald Martin and Sarah B. Cooper. And Barnett Bain is actually known more for producing, and he's produced some really interesting movies. It makes sense that he'd be connected with Eckhart Tolle. He produced The Celestine Prophecy and What Dreams May Come, which you may have heard of. He was also an executive producer for The Linda McCartney Story, which was a television movie. In this film, Milton's Secret was actually only the second film he's directed. The movie received a few nominations. It got Best Lead Actor nomination for Donald Sutherland at the Madrid International Film Festival, and the child actor, who was William Ainscough, he was nominated for the Best Lead Performance by a Male in a Motion Picture for the Leo Awards. And then the Directors Guild of Canada gave a nomination for the picture editing to Dev Singh. Now, William Ainscough, who played Milton, a 12-year-old boy, has been in quite a few different things. He's been on TV series and TV movies, and the other movies he's been in include The History of Love. Mia Kirshner plays Milton's mom. Besides a bunch of television series, she's been in movies like Cowboys and Angels, Not Another Teen Movie, and Misconception. And David Sutcliffe plays Milton's father. He's also been on a lot of television and has been in the films Under the Tuscan Sun, Happy Endings, and Cake. And Donald Sutherland plays the grandfather. To give you a summary of the film based on what Hoopla says, 12-year-old Milton Adams feels his world is in crisis. With his parents stressing about their careers and finances, and the neighborhood bully fomenting him, he is constantly anxious. But when Milton's optimistic grandpa comes to visit, he learns the secret to finding true happiness from a man who has seen the world and who is committed to living life in the now. And it makes a lot of sense that this movie is based on a book that was co-written by Eckhart Tolle. This was a really sweet movie. I loved Donald Sutherland in the grandfather role. He played this very cool, laid-back person. He did live in the moment. He enjoyed looking at the sky and listening to the birds and planting a garden. He's all about dancing to the beat of his own drummer and living in the present because he has learned the ultimate truth, how being in the moment is the key to true happiness. Meanwhile, he recognizes how his daughter and son-in-law and grandson are not living in the moment and how it is wreaking havoc on their lives. They are stressed out about money, about whether they'll be able to keep their home. And Milton is stressed that his parents are stressed, and meanwhile, he's being bullied by a kid in the neighborhood. This is a slow movie, especially at the beginning. It takes some time to see the different characters. The speech is even kind of slow. Things happen slowly. There's not even a lot of action. Most of it is characters relating to each other. So in the premise of the story, the grandfather comes for a visit because Milton's birthday is coming up. Milton also has a big speech that he's going to be saying in front of the entire school. It turns out this is happening on the night of his birthday. And that's really symbolic because what he has to say actually is helping him kind of give birth to a new outlook on life for himself. And the speech is a culmination of all the stressors that he's experiencing and how he learns from his grandfather and then channels it into something good that he can say and speak from his heart in front of all of these people, and then he influences them. But he truly could not have done it without his grandfather there. As he said to his grandfather, everything is always better when his grandfather is visiting. I do agree with the award nominations, and that William Ainscough is definitely one of the better actors in the movie, and then, of course, Donald Sutherland is outstanding. He plays this grandfather, as I mentioned, who's kind of laid back, but something that he's very tuned into is his senses. And he gets joy out of all the different sensations that he feels. And he doesn't try to tell the mother and the father and Milton how to be. He passes on nuggets of wisdom in almost everything that he says. But he really shows them how to live differently by living in the moment, by experiencing your senses and finding the joy in all of those things. And throughout the movie, you start seeing the influence that he has on all of them. Milton's mom is the grandfather's daughter, and she tries to be pretty controlling of him. She's judgmental of him. You can see how he wrestles with this, trying to keep the joy in the moment, just listening to what she has to say and then determining how he's going to respond. He's pretty clear that she's the one who has a problem. She thinks he does, but over time, we get to see what she determines is the truth in the situation. Something that I appreciate about this movie is that it helps you see life through a child's eyes. Milton shows us how big and scary the world can seem, and how stressful it can be for a child who doesn't yet have the life experience to know how to handle a bully. He also shows us how we can all use a mentor. And speaking of bullies, that is a very central theme to this movie. There's a bully who lives just a couple doors down from Milton. Being in close proximity, it makes Milton constantly feel the threat of him. They also go to the same school, they're in the same grade, they have some of the same classes. This kid is pretty unavoidable. And while Milton's parents want to help him, and they try, they really don't understand Milton's predicament. And it kind of seems like they don't know how to deal with the bully any better than Milton does. They kind of seem like kids just in big adult bodies. We get to see the adults try to deal with the bullying, and then we get to see how Milton tries to deal with the bullying, and then we actually get to see the grandfather and what he does. I'm not going to give it away, but the grandfather seems to have some kind of solution, and based on how he has been influencing Milton, it seems like Milton has caught on and is figuring his way through. There are lots of sweet moments where there's an exchange between Milton and his grandfather. His grandfather really helps Milton try to figure life out. And the whole film is really Milton's journey in moving through this period of his life where things are in kind of this stressed out upheaval. And he is modeling for the audience what it's like to work through something to get to a solution. And it seems with each step that he gets a little bit closer, his grandfather is able to leave a little nugget of wisdom for him that helps him find his way through. One tender scene that I really liked was when Milton asked his grandfather about what it was like to be in the war. He suspects that perhaps his grandfather had killed someone, and he wonders how you could come to peace with that. How can you move forward in life and feel happy? And his grandfather has a very specific message, which I'm not going to spoil it, but what he leads Milton to believe is you're always a work in progress. Even when you're a grown-up, you still have work to do. But when you can discover what it is in life that you can practice so that you mostly enjoy, well, things are just going to come easier. So in this movie, Milton is modeling for children what they go through and how they can work through things. At the same time, Donald Sutherland's character does that, I would say, for grandparents. He shows the potential of what a grandparent can do for a child. And in a way, with all of his wisdom, it's almost like he is grandfathering the entire audience. I felt uplifted through it, and I felt influenced by his performance. And seeing in some ways how this is such a small movie, I can't help but think this is the opportunity that Donald Sutherland was really excited about and what gravitated him towards this movie. Something else that I thought was funny but also very poignant. On a pretty regular basis, the movie portrayed adults being addicted to their smartphones. They just kept looking at their phones, and the message kept coming, for example, from Milton to his dad, that his dad doesn't listen to him. There was a point where we get to see an entire audience of adults waiting to see the speeches of the children at the school. And when the lights go down, there's just this sea of cell phone screens lighting up the whole area. There's no doubt that the director is trying to tell adults, put your phones down and listen to your children. They need you. Something I was surprised about is, as the movie went on, how my emotional involvement picked up. At the end, I got very emotional. The movie was full of subtleties, so it crept up on me, and I didn't expect it. By the end, I was glad that I had gone through the slow parts and stayed with it. And in fact, when you think about what the message is in terms of being in the moment, being in the now, there's something about how life can slow down when you do that. So in some ways, the film actually demonstrated what it means to be present. And that when you do slow things down, it allows you to access things that you might not normally have. It's interesting. When I think about this role that Donald Sutherland played as the grandfather and compare it to Judge Straight in American Hangman, they are very different. Judge Straight is very intellectual, and he's the one who's wrestling to figure something out. He's grounded and strong, but also peaceful and in the moment, very kind of zen. That is the one thing these two characters have in common. In the role of the grandfather, though, Donald Sutherland gets to experience life more fully. As the grandfather, he's much lighter and kind of happy-go-lucky. He savors the moments. He also works on spreading beauty. He looks in the backyard of his daughter and son-in-law's home and sees that the garden has been completely ignored, and he sets to making something beautiful out of it. And the more he does, the more he brings the rest of the family on board with appreciating the beauty that he's creating. There's a lot that I think was done quite well in this movie. Building the relationship between Milton and his grandfather, showing Milton's stress when it came to his parents' situation, showing the tensions between his parents, and also seeing the predicaments of other children and the mixed feelings they have based on the circumstances that they're in. All of that was handled very well. On the other hand, this film felt very amateurish to me. The quality of the visuals were not that great. It was pretty straightforward. In terms of what you see is what you get. There's not a lot of beauty in it. The thing that was emphasized was definitely the people and the relationships. And while that is not a bad thing, visually, there wasn't a lot that was pleasing to the eye. Also, I felt the flow of the story was a bit to be desired. Certain situations would pop up, and they didn't always have to do with other situations. I wasn't ever really lost as to where things were at in the story, but at the same time, it just didn't feel like the story flowed supernaturally. For example, Milton's mother, who is a real estate agent, is waiting at a home to show it to somebody who might be interested in buying it. And she's sitting there waiting anxiously because money is tight and she knows selling this house is really going to help them out so much they can use this money. Well, then someone walks in, and it's her father, played by Donald Sutherland. And I was scratching my head like, how did he know to visit her at this house? How did he know how to find her? He's visiting from out of town. She does her job. The two didn't add up to me. There's also a point where Donald Sutherland's character talks about how he has a lady friend, but he had never mentioned her before. The information seemed to have come out of left field and landed on his daughter and son-in-law and grandson like he had just revealed a big secret. And it just seems like it would be something that he would have told them before. That he'd been seeing this person for a while, and that it shouldn't have been a surprise for them. And it seemed out of character for what Donald Sutherland's character was all about, in terms of being transparent and mentally healthy. So did I like this movie? Yes, I did. But I don't think it's probably going to be a memorable movie for me. What will be memorable for me will be the roles of William Ainscough and Donald Sutherland. But this wasn't a super impressionable movie. Maybe if I was a child, it would be much more so, because I think I'd want to hang on to all the life lessons. But it's a movie that I enjoyed, and I'm glad that I saw it, and I learned some things along the way, but that unless I'm in a situation where I meet someone who needs the specific information that's provided in this movie, I'm probably not going to recall it. It wasn't that impressionable. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most excellent, I'd call this movie maybe a 5. Not bad, but not fantastic either. So stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie The Man on the Train after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of the show. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Milton's Secret. I'm now going to discuss the movie The Man on the Train. This movie came out in 2011, and of course it stars Donald Sutherland. It's considered a drama and a crime story, and I also watched it on the Hoopla platform. This film is rated PG-13, and it's an hour and 40 minutes. This movie was directed by Mary McGuckian, and she adapted the screenplay that was originally written by Claude Klotz. McGuckian has won a number of awards. The most recent was at the Mill Valley Film Festival. She was the winner for the Audience Award, and it was for the category of World Cinema Independent, and it was for her film A Girl from Mogadishu. Her other movies include This Is the Sea, Best, The Bridges of San Luis Rey, and Inconceivable. In terms of key actors, besides Donald Sutherland, there's Larry Mullen Jr. and Graham Greene. Larry Mullen Jr. is an Irish actor, and there are times that I could pick up his Irish accent. It wasn't clear to me if he was supposed to have it or not, or if it was just poorly done, but I could definitely hear that lilt at moments. So something interesting to know about him is he is the youngest member of the band U2. He was actually the one to form the band and held auditions in his living room, and according to the Internet Movie Database, Bono, The Edge, and Adam Clayton showed up. So he's credited with writing for a lot of soundtracks. In terms of acting, Man on the Train appears to be his first major role. Graham Greene has been in a lot of films. Besides being on television quite a bit, he was in the movies North, Touched, and The Green Mile, among many others. In this movie, Graham Greene has a very small part. He hardly speaks, you hardly see him. It's a very quirky role of someone who says something kind of philosophical once a day. Really funny. Larry Mullen Jr., on the other hand, is the other lead with Donald Sutherland. They both probably have about equally as much time on the screen. So to give you a summary of what Hoopla says about this movie. When a career criminal crosses paths with a professor, their differences spark a friendship through which both men find ways to cope with the regrets they have in their lives. In this movie, it's kind of interesting. I don't think you ever get to know the actual names of the professor and the man. And this is the man who's on the train. And the man is played by Larry Mullen Jr., and the professor is played by Donald Sutherland. The premise is there's a man on a train, and he has a headache. When he gets off the train in this tiny Canadian town, he's looking for some pain reliever. He goes into a pharmacy that's open. Donald Sutherland is in there getting a prescription. And when the pharmacist tells the man on the train that he can't give him medication without a prescription, Donald Sutherland offers him some of his pills. Now, today, that would not go over. A pharmacist would not allow that to happen. But in this case, and maybe the rules are different in Canada, or maybe they were different back in 2011, but the pharmacist hands over some of the pills that Donald Sutherland is willing to give up. But Donald Sutherland points out that these pills must be taken with water. And so he invites this man from the train to his home and gives him water. And Donald Sutherland, we don't yet know he's a professor, seems to be this man who is just lonely and wants someone to talk to. And he goes on, and he doesn't have a lot of boundaries. And he shares some very intimate personal things with this man without having ever met him before. Or maybe because he's never met him before, he feels he can open up and share this with him. In any case, he gives the man the water, he takes the pills, he leaves, he goes to find a place to stay that night, and the only hotel in town is closed. So he goes back to Donald Sutherland's home, and Donald Sutherland kindly offers for him to stay there for the rest of the week until the man needs to leave. So Donald Sutherland's character is not in the best health, hence he was at the pharmacy getting pills. He's gone in for some tests, and the following Saturday he is going to be having surgery. And in terms of the man, Larry Mullen's character is in town to see if maybe he wants to be part of a robbery. It's not clear, but it seems like he may have gone to prison and he's recently out, or maybe that's just an assumption on my part. That's what I read into it in any case. During the time that these men spend together, they get to know each other more, and they both talk about some of the things in their lives that maybe fell short. Larry Mullen's character actually doesn't have a lot to say at first, but eventually he starts opening up bit by bit. And the total opposite is true for Donald Sutherland's character. He talks and talks and talks and has all these things to say. We do eventually learn that he tutors students, he's a retired professor, and he knows a lot about poetry. And it turns out that Larry Mullen's character also appreciates poetry. For both of them, you have stereotypes in mind for how they will be, but over time we get to see that they are not at all the stereotype of who we think they are. Over time, we get to see both of them are kind of at a crossroads in life. We get to see if Larry Mullen's character is going to change. If he is really always this criminal, or if he's going to become a good man. And Donald Sutherland's character, he has always played it safe. He hasn't taken many risks. And knowing he's going to be having life-threatening surgery, he starts reflecting on his life. He sees in Larry Mullen's character the kind of person he wished he had been more like. He wished he'd had a more carefree life and had explored more and played with danger. There's a really fun scene where he goes into the room where Larry Mullen is staying at his home and uncovers some guns that are in one of the drawers underneath some clothes in the dresser. And he takes out a gun, and he goes over to the mirror, and he just looks at himself holding the gun and doing different poses with the gun. It is a complete fantasy of this professor, and it's just hilarious to see what kind of character he could be. Later on in the film, he is inviting a woman friend over. This is someone who he's never made a commitment to, never married, but they have an understanding. And before the date, he goes to the barber shop and he asks the barber to do his hair differently. He wants it all slicked back, kind of like a gangster. Probably the first time ever that he did something different. And so it's interesting how Larry Mullen's character is bringing out something else in him. There's also a scene where he and Larry Mullen decide to meet up for a bite to eat out. And there are some young men who end up getting a little bit rowdy and unruly. And Donald Sutherland's character gets up and tells them that he'd like them to calm down. Once he's opened up that can of worms, you can see the fear in him. Like, what did he just do? What did he invite into his life? I'm not going to tell you what happens, but it's just an example of a moment how Donald Sutherland's character is waking up and trying to experience some things before his life may end with the surgery. Granted, it's some time before we know he's going into the surgery and what kind of surgery it actually is, and that it is risky surgery. So at first, we see that this is just him dabbling, but eventually we see that these things that he's trying on are actually something that he needs to do to feel like he's gotten the most out of life. On the other hand, Larry Mullen's character is used to being risky and being dangerous, And here he is in this man's home, which is stable, which is calm. And for the first time, he can really sit back and reflect on what his life has been, and if living on the edge has actually been worth it. We get to see that his character thinks that he knows quite a bit. He's experienced a lot, and so he thinks he knows better, and that he can size people up. Well, the night that Donald Sutherland's lady friend comes over, Larry Mullen's character's in for a surprise, because this lady knows how to stand her ground and how to tell him the way it is. And Larry Mullen gets a little humbled because he realizes that he doesn't know it all, and that other people, you just never know what their life is like and what they actually know themselves. I like the chemistry between these two men. They both do bring something out in each other. Their essences are so different, but over time we get to see them kind of morph, and each of them becomes a little bit more like the other one. Getting a glimpse into each other's lives helps both of them come to terms with the kind of life they've had, and then the kind of life that they want to have going forward. Donald Sutherland's acting in this movie is great. He plays such a different character than in the other movies I talked about in the other segments. This character is cerebral, and he talks so much it's annoying, especially at first until you get to know him. The one thing all of his characters do seem to have in common is having some wisdom and being in the moment. In the case of this movie, though, I would say Donald Sutherland's mind is not quiet at all. It has the appearance of going all the time, constantly trying to connect dots and make sense of things. And I would say Larry Mullen's character is a little bit similar. He has something going on inside. He's thinking things through, but he seems more quiet and contemplative, almost more like Donald Sutherland was as the grandfather in Milton's Secret. It's not often that I see a lot of male relationships in movies that are tender, and that's how I would describe the relationship between Donald Sutherland and Larry Mullen. They grow an appreciation for each other and what each other has experienced, and they start bringing out the best in each other. I won't give it away, but at the end there is a climax where we get to see both of these men face their demons and offer each other something that can help them get through the fire. And while this makes a lot of sense for the end of the movie, I don't think it worked all that great. It seemed like everything was rushed, and there were pieces at the end that I was scratching my head wondering, what actually just happened? It almost made me wonder if somehow the budget had run out and they had to rush getting things together in the last moments. Some things also didn't quite add up. For example, the small town, this is the place that Larry Mullen's character and his cohorts are thinking of robbing a bank. Maybe because it would be under the radar in such a small place. But there were details pointing to the fact that this didn't actually seem like such a small town. I'll give it away if I explain, so you'll just have to see for yourself. Also, there seemed to be some inconsistencies with Larry Mullen's character. Sometimes he didn't say much at all, and sometimes he spoke up quite a bit more. This may have just had to do with the fact that he was changing, but the inconsistency made him seem kind of moody and not like he was always the same character, like there were inconsistent changes with him. Some things did work well. For example, Donald Sutherland's house. It fit his character so well. It was this large, old house that was kind of falling to pieces. It was truly an external representation of who Donald Sutherland's character was. Another thing that was great, I think I mentioned this briefly before, was Donald Sutherland's woman friend. Her name was Vivian. She's an English actress, and I had not detected any accent at all. She's had a varied career with both television and movies. She's known for the movies Laughter in the Dark, Dancing at Lughnasadh, and Agnes Brown. She plays such a strong woman in this movie. In fact, she's the only major female role. She knows her stuff, she speaks her mind, she stands her ground. It's actually kind of amazing that Donald Sutherland would match up with her. And the fact that his character does says a lot about who he is and that he may be stronger than we think he is. It does seem like his character focuses on the things that he hasn't had or done and underestimates what he really does have and what he has accomplished and the kind of character and person he really is. So Vivienne is a great foil for his character because it tells us an awful lot about him that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. And we get to see her stand up to Larry Mullen's character. And now we get to see how Larry Mullen works with women. And for the man who Donald Sutherland thinks Larry Mullen is, who's had lots of forays with many women, we get to see that maybe he doesn't know quite as much about women as he led us on to believe. Bringing in Vivienne's character, which happens at the end and is kind of a surprise, I think was an important addition to this film. If she had not been introduced, these characters wouldn't have been very well rounded out. In fact, in the beginning, Donald Sutherland talks about his experience with women, especially when he was coming of age. He divulges information that was probably too much information, and it is nice to see that he has maintained an ongoing relationship with a woman in his older age. I like how in this movie, both men get to see what their life might have been like had they been what the other person had been. There's a lovely moment towards the end where Donald Sutherland says how they met seemed to be serendipity, some kind of preordained thing. And Larry Mullen's character says, "I don't believe in that." And Donald Sutherland says he doesn't either. And yet he recognizes that everything is in place for them to have met and formed this bond, even over just a few days. There's plenty about this movie that I liked. Did I like it overall? It's not a movie where I'd say, you must hop onto Hoopla and watch this movie today. You cannot miss it. Not that. I'd say, if you are interested in seeing some interesting characters and an interesting premise, this is a good one to watch. And if you like seeing really great character work, Donald Sutherland is worth watching in this movie. But on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being amazing, I'd give it a 5 or a 6. Seems to be a common theme among these Donald Sutherland movies that I've chosen. But my hat's off to Donald Sutherland for taking risks, trying these smaller movies, and embracing being an actor, showing up and doing the work. That seems to be his style, and he's definitely prolific as a result. Stay tuned for the final segment of the show, when I'll be talking about Donald Sutherland's vast career and the movies he was in that were most memorable to me.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the final segment of the show. In the prior segment, I looked at the movie The Man on the Train. In this segment, I'm going to talk about Donald Sutherland's vast career and the movies he was in that were most memorable to me. So based on my research, Donald Sutherland was born on this day, July 17th, in 1935. He was born in Canada, in St. John, New Brunswick. He has been described as a towering presence, and in fact, he is 6 feet 3.5 inches. According to the Internet Movie Database, he has 195 credits as an actor alone. He also has some credits for a soundtrack, for being a producer, and a writer too. And now at 85 years old, he has a couple of things that are in post-production, a TV series called The Undoing, several appearances in several episodes, and then also an appearance in post-production in the TV show Swimming with Sharks. And apparently there's a film called Armageddon Time, which is in pre-production. So it's amazing his career has spanned this long, and still in 2020, he has more things coming out. I think it's always interesting to look at how an actor came to be the actor, to make that choice. So in Donald Sutherland's case, he had worked a few different jobs when he was younger. He was actually a radio DJ, and he was set on becoming an engineer after he graduated from the University of Toronto. He actually did get a degree in engineering, but he also had a degree in drama, which I think is fascinating because engineering is such a mathematical way of thinking, analytical, very different from what you need for acting. And so his degree in drama, to me, seems like a surprise. But when it came down to it, he chose to go forward with acting. And I just think, what if he didn't? What if he had gone ahead and been an engineer? And I'm sure he would have been a great engineer. But would he have impacted as many people and as many lives? He has such a long filmography. He has made memorable experiences for many people based on the stories that he has helped tell. So I personally am very happy that he decided to follow his heart and become an actor. And as it turns out, many of you may know this, but he is the father of Kiefer Sutherland, who was a Bennett in the shows 24 and Designated Survivor, among many other things. He is also a successful actor. And I think Kiefer Sutherland is in his 50s now. So in that way, Donald Sutherland has quite a legacy. And it's interesting, it looks like his father, whose name was Frederick McLay Sutherland, had worked in the areas of sales as well as electricity, which may explain why Donald Sutherland was interested in pursuing engineering. There's that connection with his dad. But from what I can see, based on my research, there is no history of drama or storytelling in his family. Something else that's interesting is that as a child, Donald Sutherland was very sick. He had rheumatic fever, he had hepatitis, and he had polio. My mom had polio, and I know that there's something called post-polio syndrome, so that even if you had polio and you recovered, especially when you get older in life, it can make it much harder for movement, depending on how it impacted you, and you can just get much more fatigued. So my guess is this is something that he is contending with in his older age. The fact that in the movie American Hangman, he hardly moved at all. He was in one spot. He either sat or stood. It made me think that this might be part of what's going on for him. It's just speculation, but I imagine having had these kinds of diseases, they are going to take their toll later in life. And it helps me appreciate that he's pushing forward and still working even at this late stage in his life. When Donald Sutherland was in college, he met his first wife. Her name was Lois Hardwick. And then in 1957, Donald Sutherland decided he was going to take acting much more seriously, and he left Canada, went to Britain, and he studied at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Following his studies there, he went to the Perth Repertory Theatre in Scotland and spent about a year and a half there. In the early 1960s, he started getting small roles. This was mostly in British television and films. Then in 1967, he appeared in some television episodes, one of which was directed by Roger Moore, none other than the actor we most associate with James Bond. And according to some information in Wikipedia, he asked Roger Moore to show some producers one of the episodes that he was in. And he did. He showed a rough cut to the producers, and this helped land Donald Sutherland in a role in The Dirty Dozen. And this is the film that seemed to really launch his career in a big way. It was one of the most successful movies of the year. It also kind of established him as an actor who could play in war movies, and so he was in 2 war films after that. One was as the lead role in the movie MASH, which is directed by Robert Altman, very famous, from 1970, and he played Hawkeye Pierce. And then he was in the war movie called Kelly's Heroes. And it's interesting because he went from these war movies onto doing a comedy. And this was with Gene Wilder. And he was in the movie Start the Revolution Without Me. Granted, the war movies did have comedic elements attached to them. Then came the film Klute. Klute is an award-winning detective thriller, and it stars Jane Fonda, and arguably this is the movie that really launched Jane Fonda's career. Something I didn't realize is that Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda were a thing for a while, and they went on to star in and co-produce the documentary film FTA, which was an anti-Vietnam War documentary. And of course, Jane Fonda is noted for being outspoken with regard to Vietnam. So there's a theme here about war for Donald Sutherland. He's been in these different war movies, and he took a stand with regard to Vietnam. And I think it's fascinating that at least in the more recent films, the ones that I've looked at on this show, he plays these more kind of peaceful characters. And in the movie Milton's Secret, the grandfather was a veteran of war. And the theme came up about what it meant to actually take someone else's life. And so it seems that this is a theme that is central to what Donald Sutherland is all about. Then he went on to make some of the movies that he's probably best known for, especially in his younger years. At the time he was in his mid-30s, he was nominated for a BAFTA Best Actor Award for the movie Don't Look Now, that came out in 1973. He starred in another war movie called The Eagle Has Landed in 1976. And that same year, he was in Federico Fellini's Casanova, as well as the thriller Eye of the Needle. And then he was in some super popular movies. For example, he was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and he was also in National Lampoon's Animal House. Both of these came out in 1978, and there seems to be a theme here also of him going back and forth between these sort of thriller movies and these comedic movies. And he just continued working along some of the best actors in the industry. In 1980, he was directed by Robert Redford, and he starred along Mary Tyler Moore and Timothy Hutton in Ordinary People, which happens to be one of my favorite movies. He worked with Marlon Brando and Susan Sarandon in A Dry White Season. He worked with Al Pacino in the movie Revolution. And over he's worked in movies that have become household names. For example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Cold Mountain, and The Hunger Games more recently. In 2017, it was announced that he was going to be the recipient of an honorary Oscar from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and it's quoted, "It was for a lifetime of indelible characters rendered with unwavering truthfulness." And it was his first Academy Award after 60 years. According to the Internet Movie Database, Donald Sutherland has made a lasting legacy on Hollywood, whether portraying a chilling and horrifying villain or playing the old, respectable character in his films. A true character actor, Sutherland is one of Canada's most well-known names and will hopefully continue on being so after his time. Well, at the rate he's going, the fact that he's still working at 85 shows that he is not really slowing down very much. A fun fact, he got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's at 724 Hollywood Boulevard, and it was on January 26th of 2011. Some of Donald Sutherland's roles that are most memorable to me are ones that I have actually touched on in some of my previous podcasts, and even earlier in this one. So the first one that really sticks out to me is Eye of the Needle. That was such a thriller. If you haven't seen it, I think it would probably hold up. Telephones might look a little different, vehicles might look a little different, but in terms of plot and what's going on, I think it will still be riveting. And get ready to be exhausted by the end. So much happens with twists and turns and power plays and you're white-knuckled sitting there on the edge of your seat. So this movie is based on a novel by Ken Follett. It also stars Kate Nelligan and Stephen McKenna, and it was filmed on the Isle of Mull in West Scotland. It's super rural, kind of cut off from the rest of the world. So Donald Sutherland is playing a German spy in England during World War II. And he has some key information about D-Day, and he needs to make it back to Germany with this information. But because of a storm, he gets stranded on this island. He's held up with this family. There's a woman who's played by Kate Nelligan. She has a disabled husband, and she has a son. A romance starts happening between the two of them, but then things start to go sour. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's just amazing to watch how active they are. Something is happening every moment. I was completely caught up. I really recommend that movie. And it's fun to watch Donald Sutherland get into his inner evil character. Another Donald Sutherland movie that I really love, I mentioned before, is Ordinary People. This was the first film that Robert Redford directed, and it is based on a novel, actually the very first novel, by Judith Guest. And he plays opposite Mary Tyler Moore. He is her husband. And this was the first time I'd ever seen Mary Tyler Moore not in a comedy and not a sitcom on TV. I don't think I'd ever seen her in a movie before. And so this showed her acting chops, and they had a great chemistry together. There was a lot of tension, a lot that was unspoken. You get to see Donald Sutherland work on waking up his consciousness about the truth of what is going on in his family. The premise is that there's a family called the Jarretts, and they have a husband and wife and 2 boys. And one of the boys ends up getting killed in a sailing accident. And the mother ends up blaming the other son for what happened. And the repercussions of this are devastating for the family. On some level, everyone is in crisis. And Donald Sutherland's character is kind of thrown into a midlife crisis because of this tragedy. His character's name is Calvin Jarrett. He is a tax attorney and he's pretty successful. So he's been able to afford to make a comfortable home for his family. And his family is everything to him. He's so proud of everybody in the family. Turns out he himself never had a father. He grew up in an orphanage. And so it was his pride and joy to be a father and to have a family of his own. But when his older son dies, he starts to question everything. And the other members of his family are kind of falling apart in their own way too. And it does a beautiful job of showing what it's like to be in that kind of crisis. It's a beautiful story and a beautiful movie. The movie won 4 Academy Awards. That includes Best Picture and Best Director. And just to clarify, it came out in 1980. Another memorable role for me was when he played Mr. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. This is a movie based on the novel by Jane Austen of the same name. And Donald Sutherland's character plays the father of 5 daughters who they need to marry off in order to make ends meet. Back in those days, the best way for a woman to be more wealthy was to marry a rich husband. He is actually very kind of zen with his wacky family. His wife is kind of crazy and over the top, and his daughters are creating a lot of chaos around the house. My favorite scene is when his favorite daughter, Elizabeth, comes and lets him know the man that she wants to marry and how he supports her in doing that. It's a memorable and touching scene, and it comes at a key point in the film. This movie came out in 2005 and also stars Keira Knightley and Brenda Blethyn. There are a lot of movies that I haven't seen with Donald Sutherland, or I saw them so long ago that I didn't remember his role very clearly in them. But based on my chatting with a few people, as well as looking at his movies that have become classics, and wanting to get a sense of his body of work, some great movies to look at are MASH, Don't Look Now, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Clute, and Cold Mountain, just to name a few. Above and beyond my favorites, in case you don't have time to watch all of Donald Sutherland's many, many movies. He and his acting and storytelling is such a gift to us all. We are lucky to have an actor who just embraces being a villain, and yet seems to stand for peace and happiness in the world. Mr. Sutherland, if you're out there listening, wishing you a very happy 85th birthday. I hope you enjoyed hearing about some of Donald Sutherland's latest movies, American Hangman, Milton's Secret, and The Man on the Train, as well as hearing about Donald Sutherland's vast career and some of the movies he was in that were most memorable to me. As always, here's to these films offering you some inspiration. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.